Good morning, everyone. Today we're going to be doing something a little bit different. We're going to do a first impressions and, really? Yeah, a breakdown type of video. First of its kind on the Rambling Man Dan. I am Man Rambling Dan, and you are Dan Mambling Ran. Don't think about it, it'll make sense eventually. Anyway, welcome. Today we are going to do a first impression and breakdown of a communication coach by the name of Alex Lyon. He did a video where he was reacting to the Bill Gates interview on PBS. This is the interview that is considered the most infamous as of recently that Bill Gates has done, because it is everything about the body language and even his verbal cues are everything you do not want to see if you dislike or if you want to see an honest person. As in, everything he said was probably very dishonest, and or it was veiled threats. Basically, indirect ways of saying this is how it is back behind the curtains, of which we project our puppet show for you to watch on. So, whether your opinion's positive or negative on Bill Gates, we're going to look at this, even without the bias that I have, that surely you do too, and take an honest look. But before that, my nose is deciding to run away from me, so I gotta go catch it. I'll be right back.
I'm going to react to a recent controversial interview with Bill Gates on PBS. It was supposed to be about vaccines, but she asked Gates about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein. My feedback is not a criticism of Gates as a person. I'm just going to look at his specific behaviors in this interview for educational purposes to see what makes his communication come off as hinky. That's a word that police officers and other people use to describe somebody who's acting nervous, suspicious, but it's difficult to articulate exactly why something seems off. We're going to consider Gates's past behavior as a baseline to look at his answers about Epstein. I already watched his answers about vaccines from earlier in the interview to see how he would normally act. And this clip starts 80% of the way into the conversation when Judy Woodruff changes the topic and starts asking questions about Epstein.
I want to point this out really quickly. If you really wanted a historical reference, he should have looked back to the late 90s when Bill Gates was at the head of the Microsoft trials. Basically, Microsoft got taken to court for, I can't remember exactly what it was. It was plagiarization, or I can't exactly remember what it was. It was some sort of a fraud-related thing. Go figure. And that would be the perfect, and I mean the perfect, historical baseline or reference to look at, because it's kind of in the same context. He's being questioned there too, obviously. Sort of like an interview, right? Everything about it is like perfect, even situationally. It would trigger the same similar emotions and everything, the setting similar. Everything about it would be perfect. You'd be able to have then an accurate baseline of how Bill Gates is in those exact situations when you start asking questions that you know are going to make anybody uncomfortable, including people who are very clear of any potential issues. So that would have been the real smart thing to have done. That's also on YouTube, I believe, as well. So you could definitely be able to watch that as a historical baseline, which is what I would have recommended he have done. But either way, it works.
Same focus. I also want to ask you about something else in the public arena. It was reported at that time that you had a number of meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, who, when you met him 10 years ago, he was convicted of soliciting prostitution from minors. What did you know about him when you were meeting with him, as you've said yourself, in the hopes of raising money?
I had dinners with him. I regret doing that. He had relationships with people he said, would give to global health, which is a interest I have. Not nearly enough philanthropy goes in that direction. Those meetings were a mistake. They didn't result in what he purported, and I cut them off. That goes back a long time ago now. There's so there's nothing new on that.
It was reported.
First, he didn't answer the question.
course
She
not.
asked him about what he knew about Epstein when they first met. He replied, I had dinners with him. His answer is misaligned, and that's the first sign of trouble. He's also giving off some very distracting body language. He's shifting in his chair, he's wringing his hands and playing with his fingers. His eyes and his head are all over the place. Our baseline showed us that he did some of these behaviors here and there in his previous answers. And now he's doing a whole collection of them all at once.
amalgamation.
And that uptick shows that something has changed. That also shows a misalignment between his words and his nonverbal cues. So if we were playing poker with Bill Gates, we'd say he's giving off tells. And in the field of communication, we call this misalignment nonverbal leakage. There's something more going on in his mind than what his words are saying. He looks bottled up, as if he's restraining himself from saying more. We then have two layers of misalignment. Woodruff's question and his answer misalign, and his own words and nonverbal cues misalign. So that's a double dose of hinky behavior. We also see a sharp increase in his disfluency. His baseline answers were averaging a filler word every 6.7 seconds. That's already a lot. His top two fillers are ah and you know. During his Epstein answers, though, he used a filler every 2.6 seconds. That's a huge increase. He's also repeating words and restarting more frequently. He said those meetings were a mistake. There's, so there's nothing new on that. And he's pausing frequently in the middle of sentences to search for words instead of pausing at the end. Those
Tread carefully.
disfluencies are all signs of conversational trouble. It's like his mind is the inside of a maraca, and he's fighting to keep it organized.
Meet with him over several years, and that, in other words, a number of meetings. What did you do when you found out about his background?
Well, and, I've said I regretted having those dinners, and there's absolutely nothing new on that.
He's obviously shaking his head before the question is done. He's agitated. More importantly, he didn't answer this question either.
Of course
He
not.
just repeated the same answer he already gave. His replies were also almost exactly the same. He said, I had dinners with him. I regret doing that the first time. That's 9 words. For Woodruff's next question, he said, I have said I regretted having those dinners. That's 8 words. To the first question, he responded, there's nothing new on that. 7 words. To the next question, he said, there's absolutely nothing new on that. That's 8 words. This, to me, sounds exactly like the type of talking points that a lawyer prepared for him on a note card. This is not how transparent people talk, and it's not even how he talks. In his earlier answers in the interview, we used that as a baseline. He used longer sentences and gave helpful details. He's also here repeating the use of the word dinner. That specific word sounds calculated to me. He might be doing what the communication researchers in crisis call minimization, to explain things in a way that make them seem less harmful. The statement, there's nothing new on that, also sounds like minimization to me. One way police interrogators establish if a suspect is telling the truth is to compare a suspect's answers with information that the police can verify in another way. So if a suspect is lying about or downplaying basic verifiable facts like where they were, they could be lying about even more important information that police have not yet verified. So the question is, does the word dinner accurately describe the various meetings that he had with Epstein, or is he minimizing? Now, I'm not a detective, but if there's verifiable information out there that that establishes that these were more than just dinners, then post a comment below about that. But even if we put aside the fact that he's just repeated his answer here, let's talk about an important concept called quantity. That's a conversational maxim, a concept that says a normal conversation will flow well when people provide an adequate amount of information, quantity. It's a sign of conversational trouble when somebody gives too much or too little information for the situation. So I looked at all of his answers earlier, and his answers about Epstein are less than half the normal length. His first several answers in the interview provide a baseline of a 46-second average. His Epstein answers average just 21 seconds. He clammed up all of a sudden, and that's another reason he comes across as hinky.
First question I have about this, because as far as I can tell, I might have to go back for myself and look back and see if he explained it. But the emphasis he was putting earlier on the timing of the amount of words for those answers. He was saying first question 8, second question 7 or 6, and then the next one he said, which was 6 and then 8. The next set. I don't understand the point of mentioning that. Because like if there was I feel like a consistency to where, say, before he was doing 8-word answers, and then after that, as you progress further down this clear line of discomfort and where he just hates everything about it, he goes to a lower number consistently, so suddenly he lessens the amount. He's a lot more short, basically. So in other words, I'm done with this. I'm just going to repeat my answer, but I'm going to shorten it even more with a little bit more of a sharpness to the end of it, kind of like I'm piercing you, of like saying, hey, shut the fuck up. I don't want to talk about this anymore. You know, so then he shortens it to 6, 5, 4 words instead of 8 or 9. That would make sense if that was consistent like that and it was progressive. But he doesn't seem to explain why he felt the need to mention that. And so if you understand why that's supposedly something in, obviously, psychology when it comes down to communication, why that's of import here on this topic, then please do let me know, because I do not get the slightest understanding of why that was logical to mention at all. And then you'll notice a little bit later he was talking about too much or too little information. I am pretty well known for being, for at least the average person, I am horrid to try to have a conversation with. I know mentally I am wired so fucking differently. I don't even think normally. I don't think like most people do. My logic doesn't follow what the majority's logic does. My logic is a completely different set of pathways. And so I actually have a horrible time communicating and getting along with people because of how I communicate being so different than how the majority of society would want to communicate and normally does. How they come to conclusions and think things are logical versus how I do. It's so opposite of each other that I have the worst fucking time trying to communicate with people, especially have an actual conversation. And even more so when people are very slow and articulate, because I am just the kind that's, I guess, kind of old school, old Southerner, where it's just like, whatever the fuck is on your mind, you're gonna fucking say it. Like, don't think before you speak, just fucking speak. Which at least you know you're getting blunt force honesty in the moment of exactly how that person, in this case me, is feeling and what they're thinking and how they're interpreting and things and how they're perceiving things, how they're understanding things, basically. But my point for mentioning that is I am excessive in detail. In fact, if again, it kind of makes sense, right? If I name this channel Rambling Man Dan, Dan obviously being me, rambling being that I ramble, it's pretty self-explanatory. That's my form of communication. I just naturally spiel and ramble and rant and rave. Like, I just have a natural melodramatic emphasis, especially when I'm very invested and interested in something or think something's important. But on top of that, I'm hyper detailed, and I'm always telling people that I am a very hyper detailed person. So when I communicate, I would automatically go into the category of I give way too much information, which then fits the idea that that's a communication issue, or I can't remember the specific term they had. It's kind of like, in other words, there's a problem with communication there. This person has a problem communicating. That would mean I have a problem communicating, at least according to whatever basis of education that these people have learned with. So I thought that was worth mentioning because I definitely laughed at that, and I know that's going to be noticeable. So I felt it was worth mentioning that.
Is there a lesson for you, for anyone else looking at this?
Well, he's dead, so in general, you always have to be careful. And I'm very proud of what we've done in philanthropy. Very proud of the work of the foundation. That's what I get up every day and focus on.
So she asks him, is there a lesson? And to me, this should have been a very easy question. But again, his answer is way off. He replied, well, he's dead. This breaks the conversational maximum of relevance. His answer does not logically correspond to what she asked him. And that's why this moment is the weirdest one in the interview. As the questions get easier, his answers get less connected. He then pivots to his work with the Gates Foundation. And in crisis communication research, we call this technique bolstering.
That works too.
When companies and politicians get accused of wrongdoing, they often try to refocus the conversation on all of the good things they're doing to bolster their image. So he says, I'm a philanthropist, I'm very generous. Now, bolstering like this is not an admission of guilt, but he is using it as a way to change the subject instead of answering a very basic question that he was
Distract
asked.
and detract.
So big picture, I don't know what really happened with Gates and Epstein. I'm not evaluating him as a person, but the way he handled these questions were really high on the hinky scale. And if you want to present yourself like a credible person, this interview is not an example of how to do that well. So what's your point of view? Post that below. I'm not going to debate you, but I'll read what you have to say. And by the way, who else should I react to? Let me know that below too.
I gotta say, I have never watched this guy Alex before. I didn't even hear about his channel, but then of course I saw this, probably because I've watched a good handful of Russell Brand videos, and that kind of goes hand in hand with this, because of course he has a video that I've watched that was breaking down this whole thing in this interview. I think he has 2 videos that breaks it down. I mean, just talking about personal biases, right? Towards a certain person, whether it's what you consider unfair cast of judgment or whatever else. But I'm trying to find like one of those fucking frames where he just looks. You could tell how fucking like dismissive and like fuck you he is about it. But the problem is all I can find is just the one fucking frame. But if you just talk about general judgment or discontent or dislike or basically in general bias against somebody, whether you think it's fair or unfair, because you have or haven't met this person before, so you don't actually know what they're really like, so to speak. I will be very bluntly honest with you. I have always strongly distrusted and very much hated Bill Gates a lot. Even long before it became trendy to do so. Even before it became long political to do so. Like, I remember still being a kid. And the best I can describe it as is probably internal instinct. Just told me that this guy is at least borderline sociopathic, if not truly a sociopath. And I would know because I grew up with a sociopath. He happens to be my dad. And unfortunately, my brother Nathan, who passed away this year, also is a sociopath. And then my aunt is a sociopath. Like, they're all textbook definitions. They're like, there's 3 major types of sociopaths. So my dad embodies one, my brother embodied another, my aunt embodies another. And it's a weird roundabout, twisted kind of way. It actually was beneficial because it helped me recognize, like, off the bat, when somebody, even like the vibration that they operate on, you can just feel when there's a sociopath nearby. You can tell when they're there. And it's just like, it's the most unique, intense, overwhelmingly powerful feeling that you get when you know you're in the presence of one. And I think even as a kid, before I even recognized I had that sixth sense, that ability to notice it, and pick up on somebody like that. Bill Gates was one of those people, probably because he's actually somewhat similar to my dad. He's not 100%, but there's a lot of similarities, and it's mostly in the negative qualities. But no, yeah, and it's just like, I've always had a bias against the guy. I never liked him, and I never trusted the things that he does. And it's actually especially how aggressively he tries to push a very specific picture of himself to everyone out there. Like, oh, I'm such a godly, virtuous figure. Look at me, love me, support me. I'm such a great person. I'm such a good man. Look at how giving I am. It's like, that immediately is probably the one of the first cues you can tell that somebody's an arrogant, fucking egotistical dick. And that's exactly why they're doing that, is because they're just a dick. And they just want their arrogant ego to be fed further and further inflated. It's never a good sign when somebody's constantly trying to talk about and flaunt themselves and their supposed good shit that they do up. That makes that person that much less trustworthy, because that means that basically it kind of shows they're not doing it because they actually give a fuck. They're doing it because they want their ego inflated and they want to be looked at as some virtuous figure, some omniscient being. And it's like, you can go fuck yourself. I don't care what you've done, because you aren't doing it for the right reasons. It proves you're a piece of shit. You can go fuck yourself. And that is a perfect example of that is a Bill Gates. Yeah, you could debate and argue all damn day, like people do, about the ethics, the efficacy of the shit that he does, even in his philanthropy, the stuff he supports or the research he funds or whatever else. Because there's a very strong debate around that, for good reason. It's because of the fact not only is he an untrustworthy figure in person, and he's very polarizing, obviously, clearly, because there's a massive divide in people on how they perceive him and what they believe him to be like, if he's good or bad or whatever. But, like, it's also just the way that he's doing it. And when you really look in depth, including again into his past and even into the again this in the late 90s, that court date that he and Microsoft had, there's so much in that and so much in all of his history, the real history, not the history that you read about and that you get from his autobiography or about people who talk about him. There's a real and very suppressed history of people who actually grew up with this man of Bill Gates, and they actually say pretty much the opposite of what people who think he's a good man say about him. Honestly, obviously, again, it's probably also partially subjective. I mean, that's kind of how it is with anybody and interaction socially. And everybody, whether they realize it or not, makes choices and casts judgments on each other, whether they realize it or not, even subconsciously all the time. And obviously everybody has different morals and different beliefs and different rights and wrongs and truths and falsehoods and facts and fictions and everything else. So yeah, I mean, you're going to have a lot of different divides on everything in life, let alone specific figures. But when you're this big and you're trying to keep yourself in the spotlight all the time, and you're trying to specifically do it with like, oh, look, here's a disaster. Let me probably have funded and caused the disaster, but let me pretend I didn't and do it so that I can profit off of the disaster by claiming I'm a philanthropist and doing all these experiments with the vaccine therapies and all this other stuff. And the list goes on. And it just gets worse. Like, all the more reason, in my opinion, why I dislike Bill Gates and I don't trust the guy, because I see him as he's a piece of shit to me. Like, again, a lot of people are going to strongly disagree with me on that, but like, it doesn't matter how differently you see him, especially when it comes down to things like this. These are the points where you can read somebody, even without training, you can tell something is really fucked up behind that curtain, that veil that they wear, that mask that they're showing you all the time. There's something really going wrong back there, and they really don't want you to think about it. They don't want you to have any attention on it. So, of course, all they can do is divert. And a point I want to make here is why I kept saying, of course, and obviously, throughout this whole thing, every time he mentioned that he wasn't answering the questions, it's because that's exactly what literally all politicians throughout history always have done, still do, and will always do. They will never actually answer a question, especially when it comes down to the efficacy of the person, when it comes down to how truly much they really stand to believe with their supposed values, their supposed morals, their supposed thoughts, beliefs, feelings, stances, their supposed promises. Like, they will always go to beat around the bush, is what the term I always use is they beat around the bush, as in they refuse to actually touch what you're telling them or asking them about. They won't touch that topic. They will never give you the answer. They will only diverge. They will only distract and detract. They will refuse to allow you to get an answer. They won't give you it. And sometimes, eventually, if you keep asking them the answer, they're going to get pissed off. I mean, anybody, if you keep repeating the same fucking thing to them over and over, demanding to get something out of them, anybody's going to eventually hit their breaking point and get fucking pissed off. Either that or they're going to lose. Just they're going to roll their eyes and fucking walk away. Because, I mean, that's fucking annoying. But, and you're not taking the point that they're not unwilling to do it. But it's like, you still, especially in positions like these, you need to be fully honest about everything. And in this day and age, people in a position like a Bill Gates hate being honest, because they damn well know that their virtuousness and their righteousness and their philanthropy is literally just for show. It's just for painting a certain picture of themselves to present to you, the average person, to get you to trust them more and get you to think and uphold them as such great figures and invest in them, basically, which makes them that much more money. That's all it's about. It's about making money. They don't care about any of the rest of the shit. That's really the truth behind it. And again, you can debate me on that if you want to. You can agree or disagree down below in the comments. But like he said at the end of his video here, also, I really would encourage you to suggest something down below for me to break down, to talk about, have a first impression of, react to all of that in the comments below, because I have a goal on this channel. Once there's actually a community that's built around it. That's up to you. You get to suggest to me a bunch of different things, and then I can actually, what I will actually do with the goal is I want to split it 50-50, so that half of the content is stuff that you guys suggested, and the other half is stuff that I choose that I want to react to or break down or whatever else. But with that said, let me know what you thought of his interview down below. I mean, the most common thing I've seen is literally what all these comments are saying. Is ominous. Is there a lesson? Yes, you either shut up or you end up dead. Pretty much. Oh, man. Yeah, and then that whole thing, he only grinned and smirked at the exact times that are the most fucked up to do so. Also says a lot about him as a person and about how he really is. But yeah, and then, yeah, you have to be careful, even creepier than saying, well, he's dead. This is basically the consensus. Like, any video you go down that breaks this down, no matter on what side of a political spectrum you might see out there, you might believe exists and is there, right or left or whatever it is, you're going to see this is the strongest consensus. This is going to be the most common thing you're going to see. And when he talks about, well, he's dead, so you got to be careful. That's when he fucking engages with you visually, but side-eye, and he has the fucking grin on his face, the biggest grin he's had the entire fucking time. That pretty much, once again, tells you everything you'll ever need to know about him as a person, about what he's really saying, and again, it pretty much suggests this, especially considering he refused to fucking answer anything. Those things fit like a fucking hand in the fucking white glove. It's basically an indirect way of him telling people what it's really like behind the fucking curtain, behind the veil, where the puppet show that they give to us every day is projected onto that curtain. That's what it's really like in the real world behind that. Is basically, yeah, you talk to factually, you talk to honestly, you might die. You might just, so you gotta be careful. And that's, you can tell, again, it's pretty much the consensus on this. So yeah, I just saw the whole quotes around the philanthropy. Philanthropy has sent him $200 billion with a $20 million donation. He admitted that. Yeah, no, that's one of the interviews he had. Is he's so proudly exclaimed about, he's like, "Hey, it's the best investment I made." When he was talking about his philanthropy work, especially in vaccines, he literally said it's the best investment he made because it's the most money he's ever made his entire life and the fastest, and year over year, ROI, return on investment. So in other words, his philanthropy isn't really to help, it's an investment, like he's investing in some other hedge fund or a corporation, a holding company. He's doing it to profit. That literally is him straight up admitting it without using those words specifically. And again, I think that's key across everything with him. And you notice it was throughout that interview on PBS NewsHour, he was doing that. He was being indirect, or what you could even argue it's actually directly indirect or indirectly direct, because he's still being very honest about what's really happening and what he's really like and what he's really doing, what they're really doing behind the scenes, without ever using any words that would be just blunt, honest, straightforward, unfiltered. So it's like the thickest fucking filter. He puts it behind like a coffee filter, if you will, and you have to read through that, what he's saying, because he's like scrawled on it what is coming out of his mouth, but you read through it and you can actually see what he's actually really saying and communicating with it. It's like there's a clear set of, I don't even know what exactly you call that kind of communication language, but it's like a very veiled form of communication. It's like, I'm going to tell you without telling you, which I guess is probably the most internet way to explain it and say it in the simplest way. I'm going to tell you what it's really like without actually telling you anything about it. And yeah. Anyway, I'm going on for way too long about this. So, yeah. There you go. That's my breakdown of the communication professor, Alex Lyon, reacting to Bill Gates' interview on PBS. If you liked, make sure, of course, you leave a like. It lets me know you enjoyed it. It lets the algorithm know as well. Helps me and helps the channel out. It helps more people find it. Let me know what you think down below and your suggestions. And I hope to see you out there someday soon. Until then, stay safe. Have a good morning. And I'll see you around. Goodbye.